In fact, had the request come to me just several months earlier, I would have turned it down. I would have said, I'm just too busy. I'm already engaged heavily in the work of social justice. I'm a full-time pastor, and we have our own internal ministry where we are engaging the community around us. We've adopted a school. We've adopted actually 2 schools at that point. One of them we've turned around and is making a STEM 6 through 12 school, the Dearborn Middle School, and renovating the building at the tune of $50 million. Doing a lot of great work. I'd said I'm just too busy. I would have said I'm too busy because I'm the president of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization. We've got a full plate of things that we really have to do. And this notion of homeless people and homeless families, I'm empathetic to it. I can be moved by it, but I just don't have space on my plate for one more thing. But it was that the invitation came at exactly the right time. Can you say the right time? Right. The right time that, in fact, I was beginning to make some discoveries, and I began to find that I really could not escape what was becoming an extraordinary call for me. Not to stop any of the work that I was doing, but rather to find a way to make sure that dealing with homeless people and homeless families were in the center, was a part of the plan. I had a good friend of mine, Reverend Johnny Ray Youngblood, some of you may have heard of him, when he first tried to convince us to get involved in what we call broad-based community organizing. Many of us pastors had the initial response which said, our plate is just too full. And his response to us was, if your plate is too full, get a platter. So I was challenged in the kind of way to recognize that what I really needed now was to trade my plate in for a platter. I had to make room, if you will. Homeless people and homeless families. Part of this came from reading the Isaiah text. It was my first real discovery that helped to frame how I think about this issue today and why I'm here talking to you about it. First, Isaiah is one of my favorite passages. It begins with the prophet in crisis. King Uzziah has died. His world has come unglued. There he is, forced into a temple. It's like this, down on his knees, pressed into prayer. He's praying and he's hoping that God will hear his prayer. That's how it begins. But by the time you get to verse 8, and several transformations has occurred to Isaiah, the latter transformation causes a flip of the script, if you will. Because by the time we get to 8, Isaiah has been opened up. And to his surprise, can you say surprise? Surprise. It has flipped. It is not that he is praying and God is listening. It is that he actually hears a praying God. And Isaiah is the one listening. You see the words in the text, the words of God. Who shall I send? Who will go for us? It is in that grand echo-ness, the same way that holy, 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 Lord God Almighty was stated earlier in the verse, that suddenly there's this echo. Who can I send? Who will go for us? Who can I send? Who will go for us? And Isaiah recognized what I recognized, and that was that God was praying. What a shocking discovery. God was praying, and Isaiah recognized to his shock that perhaps he was the answer to God's prayer.
That's right.
So Isaiah says, here am I, Lord. Send me. Could it be that the God that we encounter in Isaiah chapter 6 praying is the same God that the psalmist is talking about when he writes, who is like our God? Who stoops, can you say stoops? Stoops. Really the word carries with it the sense of humble. Who humbles himself and looks down upon the heavens and the earth. And when this God looks down upon the heavens and the earth, this God sees the poor and this God sees the needy. And he doesn't just see the poor and see the needy, but is moved to do something and lifts the poor and lifts the needy and places them with princes, the princes of their people. It is nothing more than the text simply suggesting that God has something to do, that a part of God's mission statement, if you will, is to find a way to take the poor and the needy, to take those who are in the dust and those who are in the ash heap of humiliation, and to lift them to places of power, economic power, political power, standing in the community, standing and integrity within themselves. And as I looked at that text, I thought I caught a glimpse, I'm sure, that God in the text, dealing with the needy and dealing with the poor, is in fact dealing with homeless people.
All right. All right.
And homeless families. And then as I looked at the text, and I thought about a praying God, perhaps it was not as easy as the text makes it out. Perhaps actually the tense of the text is that God stoops. That's present tense. God lifts. That's present tense. That God is at work. But perhaps the actual work of God is done by people. What a shocking surprise. That the lifting, the raising is done by people. But even the text is instructive. And perhaps inside of that is a God who is praying to find some people to help with the process of lifting the poor and the needy, and in the heart of that, homeless people and homeless families. And perhaps we have gathered here today to consider whether or not we will be answers to God's prayer.
That's right.
Now, to some degree, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. But if any of you have choirs, I know most of you have had some experience with choirs, you know that a good choir is not just the choir that knows the song, but a good choir has reached a level of commitment through its rehearsals that it is determined to deliver this song from a place of conviction and a place of passion. So you have the choir that just kind of throws something together. That doesn't necessarily move you. You say, I'm happy to see you, and I'm happy when it's over. But then you've got the choir that has rehearsed. You've got the choir that has dug deep. You've got the choir who has not only learned the song, but has internalized the message of the song. And they come from that place, and it lifts you into a new place. I think perhaps God has called the choir together.
Amen.
We might move from just kind of sloppily throwing things together. Just kind of doing it haphazardly. Just kind of doing it when we get to it. To perhaps thinking about homeless families and homeless individuals as the core of what we do. Well, let me just say that I got here by surprise myself. The text is instructive, at least to how I got here. It first says that God stoops and God looks. Then God sees. Can you say God sees?
God sees.
God sees among the poor and the needy. God sees homeless families and individuals. It's helpful to me to bring it home to this point, that in fact it argues that God sees, if I take the text at its face value, God sees the 7,585 homeless people in Boston, almost 8,000 people. God sees them. God sees. Can you say God sees?